I've been feeling a little bit lost recently, in need of a good kick up the backside to get me doing something again. Luckily, my mate Brian came round the other day, demanding a cup of tea of course, but producing a thing that he called a present. That's a coded message normally for "I've bought a kit and I want you to build it for me." Never one to be a trendsetter. I'm way behind the times on this one as well, because it's way back in 2015 that Dapol produced the ready-to-run model of a auxiliary brake tender. Previous to that being released, there were kits available, namely from ABS, Genesis and PDK, but all of pretty much the same version, which is the diagram 555. Into the era of 3D printing, and lo and behold, all 4 examples are now available as downloadable kits or off of the internet somewhere from various sources. So in this video I'm going to be building the PDK kit that I acquired some years ago, and also the resin print that Brian got me just the other day. The added challenge being the scant instructions with the PDK kit and none at all for the 3D printed kit. The printed kit that Brian got me was just a body, so I'm going to have to supply all of the fixtures and fittings, including the bogies, which are going to be MJT Bogie Kits, available from Dart Castings. I've done these before in several build videos, and I'm going to do it again here, but in less than 2 minutes. You might have already seen the short that I put out a couple of days ago. If you don't want to watch it again on here, skip to 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Right, let's try and build an MJT rigid frame bogie with coupling attachment in under 2 minutes. First off, we'll get everything out of the box, clean it up, release everything from the sprues, solder in the brass bearing cups, fold everything up and solder the joints. Insert the wheels, then fold up the end stanchions and solder them on, making sure that the wheels turn. Solder an 8BA nut to the back of the base plate. Countersink a hole into the back of the cosmetic side frame so that that goes over the brass bearing cups. Fix the base plate into the model, making sure that it's flush with the bottom of the sole bar. Tape up the wheel treads ready for paint. Fold up and solder the NEM Coupling Pocket. Cut it to length. Glue it in. Paint is primer and then not black. Fitting to the model is a washer on the base plate, then the triangular pivot box. Cut a piece of brass rod to the length so it fits between the bogie sides. Fit the bogie, line up all the holes on the pivot box, slide in the piece of brass rod through all of the holes, adjust the 8BA screw so that everything is firm but not tight. Don't forget to remove the tape from the wheel treads. So I can keep everything at the same pace because we're doing a double build. I'm just going to quickly build the bogies for the PDK kit. Again, we start by cleaning the brass on the frets, removing it from the sprues, and then folding up all of the sides and ends. Fit and solder the brass bearing cups, and then as the MJT kit, we solder all of the fold lines. If you haven't got soldering iron, or you're a bit wary of using one, apparently you can use super glue to do all of this. The PDK kit does come with supplied wheel sets, but they are only insulated on one wheel, and because the bogie frame is metal, it does throw up some odd shorts on any railway, regardless of whether you're DCC or analog. So for that matter, I'm going to discard them for this project and use some Hornby wheel sets instead, which are insulated on both wheels. You can see that I'm pointing to the insulating hard plastic that sits between the wheel and the axle. Now that they're inserted into the bogies, I'll just do a quick roll test to make sure I haven't pinched the sides in too much. Drill the back of the axle boxes out on the cosmetic side frames, and so that they clear the brass bearing cups. The brass bearing cups are 2mm in diameter, so if you use a drill that's about 2.3, that should give you plenty of play to be able to put them in the right place when you glue them on. And super glue is more than good enough to glue the cosmetic side frames on. This unit now will be really rigid, so we won't be able to take the wheels out for paint. So the best idea I come up with is to cut some strips of masking tape and protect the wheel treads. It should be quite apparent that we're building two very different looking kits here. One with the square body and one with the rounded top body. But did you know that there are actually 3 different types of round top body versions? Now, I'm no rivet counter, he said, with his tongue firmly stuck in his cheek, but when presented with drawings of said vehicles, it's easy to spot the difference and tell them apart. The drawings, by the way, are available on Barrowmore Model Railway Group website, link in the description. The biggest difference between these 3 will be the bogie type used. That will be 8'6" Gresley bogies or 9-foot wheelbase LMS bogies. The other difference that's glaringly obvious to me, anyway, would be the length over headstocks. Not that you'd be able to tell just by looking at what a model on at any scale, because the difference is the longest is 13 inches longer than the other 2, which equates to, in 4mm scale, 4.2mm-ish. The bogies have got a little bit of weight behind them because of the nature of their construction, i.e. etched brass and white metal cosmetic sides, but the bodies are incredibly light. So I thought I'd fill up the void underneath with strips of lead. These things all need a bit of weight to them because whether they're being pushed by an engine towing wagons or coupled directly between the engine and the wagons, they are going to have a tendency to ride high on the rails if they're very light. I glued a piece of styrene sheet over the top of the lead just to keep it in place. I decided to grind off the bogie pivot bosses, as just a personal preference, and the bogies that I'm going to be putting on, because they did sit just a little bit too high for MJT bogies that we've got. The mounting plate that comes with the bogie kit is a lot easier to bend up and get to the right height than what it is to adjust the boss that comes with the body kit. And that mounting plate needs to be flush with the bottom of the sole bars. After fitting the buffers, we can calculate where the NEM coupling tongue needs to go and how much we need to cut off of it. The PDK kit is quite old, so there is no such thing as an NEM pocket associated with the kit. I've got some resin printed ones from somewhere that I just attached to the end of the bogie stanchion. And after what seems like forever picking bogies, which is probably why my nose is bleeding, it was time to do some detail work on the bodies. There wasn't much. It was handrails, lamp brackets and handbrake wheels. As we go into the initial stages of paint, let's just talk briefly about what these vehicles actually were. The story goes that when diesels replaced steam engines, they lacked the weight and brake force capabilities to tow the same trains as the steam engines were doing, with ease. The answer would have been just to put 2 diesel locos in multiple at the front of every train. However, the railway at that time was vastly different and very much still freight orientated, and there just wasn't the amount of engines to go round to do that sort of thing. I suppose a side note is in order to say that most of the wagons at that time were unfitted, as in didn't have an automatic brake that was being capable of being applied from the loco at all. So they just had a handbrake only, rather like these that I've done in previous videos. I suppose you could argue that you could look at these vehicles in one of several different ways. You could call them a brake van without a guards compartment. You could call them an extra loco without actual traction power, or you could just call them a brake force runner. Back to the painting, and what you see me doing here is a technique that I'm trying out for the first time, which is called pre-shading. Just search that term in YouTube and it will come up with dozens of aeroplane model makers that use this technique to break up the surface before actually applying the top coat of paint, all of which needs to be sprayed at very low pressure and a very high ratio of thinner to paint. And you should be able to see all of that marbling through the top coats of paint, hence the name of the technique, pre-shading. I also pre-painted some of the other panels, one in a rusty brown colour and the other one in just NATO black, because I thought it would be all too easy for this thing to just end up as just one big block of colour. And I thought that would be just an easy way to prevent that from happening. With my big clumsy hands and cluttered workspace, you can see that these things have already taken a bit of a beating by the paint being chipped and dinged all over the place. But I'm not particularly worried about it. I think it will just, add a little bit more to the overall finish when we're done. Transfers were from Fox, and the sheet number is on the screen now, and they are, or were, applied in the usual way with warm water and a set of tweezers. Although I'll have to redo these ones because they are slightly on the piss. Turning to my favourite modelling pigment, track rust, I'm just going to give these panels that I did on the diagram 555 just a little dusting, just to make sure that they don't look like painted panels and more like rusty panels. On the Stratford built examples, diagram 558, the square bodied ones, I'm just going to layer the rusty pigment all over the top, because being a flat surface open to the elements, it's just going to rust to hell. I'm also going to do a little bit on the lower sides on these ones, because photographic evidence suggests that they were quite corroded down the sides as well. Back to the paint booth, and another one of my favourite colours, Brake Dust and Revel number 9, not black. Again mixed with a high proportion of thinner to paint ratio, because we don't want to change the colour, so to speak. We just want to tarnish what's already there. You can see how thin it is on my glove, and when applied to the model, it's as if we're not actually doing anything. The camera doesn't really pick it up too well. A paintbrush damp with thinners dragged over the surface would tell a whole different story though. This round top version at the moment looks a bit like a patchwork quilt, but this process is going to tone all of that down and blend everything together. It will take a little bit of time, and this is only the first coat. Next we're going to not clean the airbrush and just drop in our not black into the cup, because that will tone down the black even more than what it already is. Blast out the residue of the brake dust, making sure that the black is coming out at the end, and very, very light coats with this, because this could destroy all of the hard work that we've done so far. As usual, I'll then repeat step 1, which is not cleaning the airbrush again and filling it with our original mix of brake dust. And this time we're going to be more targeted in our approach. So the first coat was a more general overall liquor paint, and this one will be aimed at any spots that have been missed or anything that we think needs special treatment. The vehicle itself now looks incredibly grotty, which is prototypical for what this thing actually is. I'm going to leave it alone now for 3 or 4 hours so the paint is completely dried off, And that way I can tell whether it needs a little bit more or whether it's had enough. And now for a schoolboy filming error, making sure that your fingers get in the way of the camera and distort the focus away from the thing you're trying to film. Not once, but twice, while painting the silver part of the hydraulic buffers. Talking about buffers, that's the last thing I'm going to do, is put a nice little dab of grease on the end of them. And on my lens by the look of it. This is also going to highlight how stark and bright just flat black is, because that's all that paint is. Blended in with a nice little cotton bud. Lovely. No, I didn't even forget to take the tape off of the wheel treads this time. I'm really pleased with the way these have turned out, actually. I was a bit sceptical about them at first, but yeah, really pleased. And almost disappointed I've got to give one of them back to Brian. And so, on to the layout and into revenue earning service, where when first introduced, it was more common to see these things being propelled or pushed, that midway through their lives, that they were then instructed to be put behind the loco and towed along with the rest of the train. And that's because I'm sure I've read somewhere that there was numerous accounts of drivers trying to get close to the signal, as we do, and running past it, misjudging the length of the brake tender completely. Doesn't happen these days. Well, not much. Only 122 of these things were ever built, so they weren't that common. In their latter years, and my first years of being interested in railways, as in the late 1970s, they would have been very thin on the ground and quite rare to see. To see two passing each other on trains would have been an absolutely incredible sight.